Bismillah, inna alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, ma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What I've basically said for our non-Muslim guests amongst us is, may the peace and blessings of Allah, God, be upon you all. And first and foremost, I'd like to start by saying, time is one of the most precious things we have as human beings, right? And the very fact that you guys are here and you've taken a couple of precious moments out tonight to be here, to sit through this, shows a lot, and shows that this question, the question about God and God's existence, is something that's important to you and important to all of us. And it should be, for the Muslims and non-Muslims, right? Because as Muslims, what we need to do is we need to communicate the reality, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, to our non-Muslim friends in humanity, our brothers and sisters in humanity. And for non-Muslims, it's an important question, because what we all realize as human beings is that at some point in our lives, we tend to ask these very important questions about purpose, about meaning, right? Who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going? And the likes. So I thank you guys for being here today, and hopefully we'll have a very engaging discussion and a more engaging Q&A. I'm not going to take too long. I'm not going to take an hour. I'll probably take about 30 minutes to 40 minutes, and then leave more time for Q&A, inshallah. I think that would be much more beneficial, inshallah. So what I want to do today, and before I start, what I want to do is I want to, if you like, have a small paradigm shift, especially for the Muslims, because generally when we think about the existence of God, the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what we do is we straight away jump to argumentation, right? We straight away think about proof. We straight away think about evidence, right? What evidence do we have for the existence of God? What proofs do we have? What can I share with my non-Muslim friends, right? Maybe a good deductive argument, maybe some sort of empirical evidence, so on and so forth. But what I want to do is I want to create a small paradigm shift today. And what I want to suggest is that to believe in God, the belief in God, if you like, is self-evidently true. God, from the Islamic perspective, we believe is an axiomatic belief. It's a foundational belief. It's a belief that doesn't require any evidence, right? And then you're probably thinking I'm going crazy, right? He's in Queen Mary University, there may be atheists in the crowd, and he's saying we don't need evidence or proof for the existence of God. But we don't. That's the reality. And I'm going to cover this from many different angles. But firstly, what I want us to realize is that in reality, in life, what we have done as human beings, as a civilization, is we've come to some beliefs, which we call, from the perspective of Western philosophy, basic beliefs, right? Axiomatic beliefs. Some examples are, the real world is real. This is an axiomatic belief in science. Science is pegged on this belief. We cannot have science if we don't believe that the real world is real. Another axiomatic belief is that there are other minds other than our own minds. That's another axiomatic belief, a self-evident truth, an unproven assumption. Another basic belief, or axiomatic belief, is that the universe has age to it. We live in a universe which has age to it, because there's no way of proving that the universe didn't just come into existence 5 minutes ago with an inbuilt appearance of time, age. There's no way of disproving this notion, but it's basic to believe otherwise, right? And now focusing on the belief that the real world is real, just to drive this point home, I want us to think about something for a second. Can anyone here prove that they're here right now, really here right now? Can anyone prove that the table they're sitting on, or the chair that they're sitting on, or the pen they're holding, or the phones that are in their hands or in front of them are actually real? Can someone prove that? Think about that for a second. Can you prove I am standing here right now and I'm speaking to you? Now some of you may be thinking, well, I can say, well, I can see you, right? I can feel the chair that I'm sitting on. I can see the table in front of me. I can see my phone. I can taste the pen I'm holding, right? Maybe I bite into it and I can taste it. But all I have to say is, well, how do you know what you're seeing, smelling, tasting, and feeling isn't just in your minds? And you're being made to feel like this. How do you know that you're not a brain on a distant planet, on a different galaxy, yeah? And some aliens are sticking probes into your brain, making you feel like you're here right now, making you feel like this is actually taking place. How can you disprove this notion? The reality is you can't. You cannot disprove this notion, but it's basic. It's basic to believe that the real world is real. And see, thinkers and philosophers of the past throughout history, they realized we need to start somewhere. To attain knowledge, to learn, to develop, to progress, we need to begin somewhere. And where people begin is what you call a basic belief, as an axiomatic belief, okay? And they realize if we don't have basic foundational beliefs, we will end up in an infinite regress and we'll never have any knowledge. We won't be able to get anywhere. And the example of science I draw again, which is that science is pegged on the axiom that the real world is real. If you don't believe this, you can't do science, right? You cannot do science, but you cannot empirically validate this belief. It's impossible. So in the same way, what I'm arguing is that the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in God, is basic, it's axiomatic. Now some of you may be thinking, well, okay, that's clever, but I can then say, well, maybe there's a great big samosa, yeah? A giant samosa that created the earth and is hiding under the North Pole or under the South Pole, yeah? That I can say that's a basic belief. Some of you may be thinking that I can make anything a basic belief. Maybe a cookie monster, maybe the great fairy or the great pumpkin. But we can't do this because basic beliefs have, if you like, a criteria. There are certain things, requirements for a belief to qualify as basic. And if you guys are more interested in this, let me just give you a little reference. If you go to the IRO website and you search Hamza's essay, article he's written, it's called Denying God, Denying Reality. He goes into this in great detail, right? You can find it in the IRO website. But just to give you a brief summary of it, the point is the basic beliefs require criterion, right? There's a criteria. And I'm going to share 3 with you. Number 1, basic beliefs must be cross-cultural. So what I mean basically is they must appear across cultures, through different places in different times, to different communities and cultures. Right? It doesn't mean they're necessarily universal, but they're cross-cultural. Secondly, a basic belief must be foundational. Now what do I mean by foundational? Basic belief must be foundational, meaning that you have it as a foundation, just like the building work of a house. You have the foundation, the groundwork. And then on top of that, you can build a house. So a basic belief must serve the purpose of being foundational, meaning once you maintain it or you hold it, you can base or build a worldview on top of it. Okay? So it must be foundational. Thirdly, it must not require any information transfer. Now, I'll give you an example. Imagine you take a group of children and you put them on a desert island. They will naturally grow up believing in the real world. The sand is real, the sky is real, the trees are real, the coconuts are real, wherever it may be, right? They would naturally grow up believing this. It wouldn't require information transfer. It wouldn't require an individual to come from the outside world to teach them these concepts. Okay, so no information transfer necessary. In the same way, if you take a group of children, put them on a desert island, they will naturally grow up believing in a creator or supernatural causal agencies without requiring any information transfer. But when it comes to the great samosa on the South Pole, unless you have some sort of concept of Indian cuisine or samosas, you can't come to that belief. There's no way you can come to that belief, right? So it must be a belief that's not based on information transfer. So essentially what I'm positing is that belief in God is self-evidently true. It's axiomatic. And if you deny the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being basic, realizing that you don't need any evidence to prove God's existence, you don't need any argumentation, you're completely warranted and justified in believing God being basic. If you deny this, then you have to deny other basic beliefs. You have to deny the belief that the real world is real. Don't do science then. You have to deny the belief that you aren't the only mind. There are other minds in the room or in this world. You have to deny all of these basic beliefs if you deny the belief in God as being basic. Right? And the reason I share this, and I want us to understand this, is because we have this idea. We have this idea as Muslims, especially in the 21st century, that when we share the message of Allah, when we share the reality of God, we have to give evidence. We have to give argumentation and so on and so forth. But we don't. We don't. Just like you don't have to give evidence for the real world being real, when you accept that as an axiom for science, you don't have to do it for God either. And I would even argue, believing God, mashallah, but I would argue believing in God is so basic that if you maintain this as a basic belief, you don't require any other basic belief in some respects, right? Think about it for a second. If you believe God exists and He's basic and it's foundational and that's axiomatic, what is the real world real? Yes, Allah created it. He placed us in it. Are we real? Yes, God created us to test us in this life. Are there other people, human beings? Yes, because God made other human beings. We don't need to maintain or hold on to any other basic beliefs. If we maintain God as a foundational belief, there's no need for other basic beliefs. And beautiful thing is that from the Islamic tradition in Islam, we know that the Prophet ﷺ said over 1400 years ago that, and I'm paraphrasing, he said every child's born on the fitrah, right? This innate disposition that Allah has created every human being on. It's mentioned in the Quran too. Allah has created us on this fitrah. And this fitrah, if you like, is this disposition to recognize God, to turn towards Him. This need to worship. right? And this is something interesting because we see the need to worship even amongst atheist communities. We see in certain atheist communities, certain figureheads in public being sanctified, statues being made, them being idolized. It's human nature. And recently, there's some research as well which is coming forward by the likes of Justin L. Barrett, who studied children, and Olivera Petrovich, where they've shown that children naturally develop the belief in God. It's innate. He calls it natural religion. Children naturally and rapidly develop the belief in supernatural agencies. Obviously, he has his own conclusions. He concludes it from an evolutionary perspective. Nevertheless, that's an extrapolation. That's an inference that we make based on the data. We're speaking about the data right now. The data is that children naturally and rapidly develop the belief in God. We can have our own inferences. That's not important right now, but the point is they do. Right? And this supports the notion of the fitrah, exactly what the Prophet ﷺ said over 1400 years ago. Exactly what he said. So I wanted us to really understand and appreciate this point. We don't need to prove the existence of God. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean we don't have good arguments and good reasons. We're going to look at some in a bit. We have good reasons to believe in Allah's existence. We have good argumentation. But all argumentation and reasoning does, it serves to trigger the fitrah. It serves to trigger this innate disposition amongst people, amongst human beings. Right? This is what we need to realize. We don't believe in God because we can reason to His existence. Our rational faculties are limited. Right? If you study the philosophy of science, you realize the limitations of science. Because of our limitations. Right? Our reasoning can serve us and take us so far. But the belief in God is not pegged on the fact that we can prove His existence. We believe in Allah first and foremost because of the fitrah, because it's innate. And then we have argumentation and reasoning and so on and so forth, which supports this notion. Right? Everyone okay with this so far? If there's any questions, I know it's a new concept. Any questions, please ask at the end. I'll try to clarify the best I can. Now moving on, the next thing I want to talk about is the reality of denying God. What does it mean for a human being to deny the divine? Right? What does it really mean? And the reason I want to do this is, again, moving away from the narrative of arguments, look, here's a deductive argument, premise one, premise two, conclusion, is because it's very dry. As human beings, we're deeper than that. We have something more profound. We're not just brains. We're not just a rearrangement of molecules. Right? We're not just atoms. We have something far more deeper as human beings. We feel, we care, we love. We think with the hearts, we feel with the hearts. So I really want to try connecting with people here today. Right? It's not about egos. And this is why I want to really go into what it actually means to deny God. Right? Let's think of it from the perspective of meaning. What does life mean in the absence of God? Think about this for a second. What would it mean if our brother here, Sultan, he pulled out a gun right now, right, and he shot me? And at the same time, he took the same gun and he shot the table or the computer in front of me. What's worse? Shooting me or shooting the computer? I'm sure you guys know, man. What's worse? Shooting me, right? But the question is why? I am a rearrangement of molecules. If God does not exist and naturalism is true, naturalism meaning everything is physical, it's a closed system, all physical effects have physical causes and nothing beyond this. If naturalism is true and we are here by accident, we are just a rearrangement of molecules, an accidental byproduct of this lengthy evolutionary process. If I am just a rearrangement of molecules, what difference does it make if you shoot me or shoot the computer? I am a rearrangement of molecules, that's a rearrangement of molecules. Think about this for a second. What difference does it make? Nothing. Some of you may argue, well, you're a more complex rearrangement of molecules, yeah, compared to the computer. But why are we getting sentimental? Where's the link there? Why does complexity have to do with more care? Why is it if something's more complex, does it matter more? Why have we got that concept? It doesn't work. So there's no difference. There is no meaning. Think about this. What difference does it make if God does not exist? If I live like a saint and I do all the amazing things in the world, help people, take care of people, give charity, change the world for the better, or if I live like a sinner. I live like an evil person that commits all the atrocities in the world and does all of these things. What difference does it make? Think about this. If my end is the same, if all of our ends is the same, 6 foot under, being eaten by worms, maggots, and whatever other creatures may live underground, if our ends are the same, what difference does it make if I live as a saint or if I live as a sinner? What difference? Akhi, you tell me. Does it make any difference? No. It makes no difference. Our ends are the same. Once you're dead, khalas, nothing more. Finished. There is no ultimate meaning. There is no ultimate meaning. We can ascribe meaning to our lives, but that's nothing short of deluding ourselves, because we're making things up. We're plucking things out of thin air as we go along. Let's think about purpose. What purpose do we have in the absence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the absence of God? Ultimate purpose. Again, nothing. Accidents don't have a purpose. Right? You can ascribe purpose to yourself. You can say, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a mechanic, I don't know, I want to be a historian, wherever it may be. We can ascribe purpose to ourselves as human beings. But that's making things up, in other words. We're making things up, literally. We're born, we're thrown into reality, we wake up, we become conscious, we become aware as we grow, and we are surrounded by reality, we're surrounded by things, we're surrounded by systems and processes. And we grow in these systems and processes, and we ascribe things to ourselves as we grow up. But this is making things up as we go along. There is no ultimate purpose in the absence of God. Is there any true happiness? Let's think about happiness for a second. Happiness is something as human beings we all want to attain, right? If you play the why game, right? If you ask someone, what do you want to be? I want to be a doctor. Why? Because I want to help people. Why? Because I feel good. Why do you feel good? Because it makes me happy. It all comes down to happiness. As human beings, we're searching for happiness. We're searching for contentment. But in the absence of God, can we truly be happy? Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you fall asleep right now. For some reason, during lunchtime, you were drugged, and your lunch was drugged, and you came to this auditorium now, and just next 5-10 minutes, you fall asleep. And the next thing you realize, you wake up and you're on a plane. And you're sitting on a chair. Think about the first reactions you're going to have. Think about what you're going to be feeling when you first wake up on this plane. Think about those. Let those feelings develop for a second. You've just woken up on a plane. You were in a classroom, and then suddenly you've woken up on a plane. How does it feel? Think about the feelings. But then, suddenly, you realize you're sitting in the most comfortable chair you've ever sat in. Right? You can smell the most beautiful fragrances and smells. You're presented with an amazing 5-star luxury meal. Right? And you're enjoying these things. You start to enjoy these things temporarily. But ask yourself the question, would you truly be happy not knowing how you got on the plane, where the plane's going, or when it's going to stop, when it's going to land? Can you truly be happy? Even though you've got these temporary distractions, can you truly be happy? The answer is no. You may be distracted temporarily, but you can never truly be happy in the true sense. And this is our state as human beings. This analogy applies. Because as human beings, as an American writer once said, we're thrown into reality. And we become aware as we grow up. And we're taken by these systems and processes. But we realize as human beings, somewhere down the line, that we have questions. We have questions. We think, who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going? For some, it's easy. Brush it under the carpet. I did this myself for a very long time. Just brush it under the carpet. But for others, it lingers on. It eats away at you on the inside. On the outside, you're temporarily enjoying life, you're hanging around with friends, you're studying, you're working, you have family commitments, and so on and so forth. But in the inside, it's eating away at you slowly, bit by bit. And it's fascinating. Why? If we are, again, the result of naturalism, blind random physical processes, and you may say guided by evolution and natural selection at some point down the line, why is it when this process is concerned with survival and reproduction, has it led us to have thoughts or questions which can be detrimental, and they are detrimental? We know such questioning about purpose and existence has led many people to commit suicide. It leads many people to depression. Why? Why would this process result in something like this? It doesn't make sense. It really does not make sense. And this is why we go on a search, we start looking for answers. And this is why in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us clearly that this life is a test. We'll continue to compete in worldly gains, and this world continues to distract us until we enter our graves. Until we enter our graves, and that's when we wake up. But why wake up then? Why not wake up earlier? Realize you're a human being. Realize you feel. You're more than just a biological machine. Realize these things and realize you have these questions, and there's nothing wrong with this. It's just it's cross-cultural. People have these questions. Every single human being asks these questions at some point. And realize we need answers, and look for the answers sincerely. And the reality is, many may say, if you're a staunch naturalist, you may say, well, there's no minds, there's no consciousness, just the brain. I'm a biological machine, a robot. Yeah, but apply that when you go home to your family. Apply that when you see your kids the next time. Apply that when you see your mother. Apply that when you have a new baby. Even the most staunchest of naturalists, I would argue, when they're in these situations, they feel, they think, they reflect, they feel from the heart. They connect with people and human beings. They feel love. It's not just a chemical reaction at that point. It's more than that. And it's something to think about, food for thought. Something to really think about. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran continuously tells us, don't let this worldly life distract you. Wake up. Wake up, people. Wake up before it's too late. Wake up before it's too late. The next thing I want to touch upon briefly is something very interesting. Again, I'm not going to go down the route of arguments. Think of this as reflecting over reality, okay? And what I want to share with you is something very interesting about reality. And again, related to science, there's two things science requires, okay? Two things science requires which are fundamental and we don't really think about or question. One is a rational mind, a mind that can lead us to truth, a mind that has the ability to attain truth and distinguish between truth and falsehood, and an intelligible universe. A universe that we can understand and comprehend, right? And the most fascinating, and it blows my mind each time I think about this, is that we have both. Both, and that too in a very, very complementary way, in a very unique way. Because if you think about it, you can take the analogy of a lock and a key, right? The lock being the universe and the key being our rational minds. And not any key fits any lock. Our minds have the ability to, whatever extent, understand this universe. And that's something amazing. Again, if naturalism were true and everything is a result of blind, random, non-rational physical processes, dead processes, just molecules whizzing around, gases colliding, whatever it may be, then how have we ended up with this? How have we ended up, firstly, with a universe which is intelligible, a universe governed by distinctive laws, a universe which is mathematically coherent? Interestingly, scientists and thinkers of the past also noticed this. And this was something that mesmerized them. Einstein, for example, said, what's inconceivable about the universe is that it's at all conceivable. Right? And this is just one statement. If you read his works, throughout his works, he spoke about the rationality present, entrenched within the universe, and how it fascinated him. Our universe is rational. It's mathematically coherent. It's fascinating. It's amazing. We can do calculations, and we could take those, we could superimpose them onto the universe, and they make sense. There's a unique thing going on, something amazing going on here. And on top of this, we have rational minds. Not only do we have rational minds, we have minds that can attain truth, distinguish between truth and falsehood. Again, simple way to posit the question is, how do you get rationality from non-rationality? If everything is a result of blind, random, non-rational, physical, dead processes, then how have these blind, random, non-rational, physical, dead processes resulted in rational minds, in ordered minds, in minds that can attain truth? Now, some may argue, well, we have this whole process of evolution and natural selection, and a rational mind that could, mind that can attain truth can lead us or help us better survive. But it doesn't really add up, because survival is concerned with survival value. Evolution is concerned with survival value, not truth value, right? And it's very easy to show that true beliefs as well as false beliefs both can adequately result in survival. To which degree is irrelevant. As long as they can, they can. It doesn't add up. It really doesn't add up. I think it was John Barrow, he makes this point as well in the Templeton Address. He says that natural selection is not concerned with discovering black holes or understanding, the Andromeda galaxy, wherever it may be. It's concerned with survival, right? And when we, as human beings, are put in a survival situation, we go back to instinctual reasoning. We do. When someone or a group of people, say you're walking down the road, akhi, and this group of guys, they start chasing you, what are you going to do? With knives in their hands, what are you going to do? What would you guys do? Run. And you may be a math major or a science major. Are you going to start calculating your descent into the nearest corner shop? Or into the nearest tree, the jump into the nearest tree? No. Basic instinctual reasoning, back to that. You just run. You hide. We do the basic things when it comes to survival. We go back down to basic instinctual reasoning. There is a distinction here. There's a unique distinction between discoverability and, if you like, we use such a term, and survivability. We've been given rational minds that can understand the universe and given a rational universe. Now, naturalism, there's no real answer. It doesn't really explain these two phenomena. These two things which lead us or give us the ability to do science. But on Islam, from the Islamic perspective in particular, we can draw a beautiful conclusion. See, let me ask you guys a question. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create us? Why were we created? To worship Him, right? We were created to worship Allah. Seldom in the Quran does Allah, God, try proving His existence. He never does, hardly ever. Instead, what Allah does is He takes us from His existence to His worship. Right? He takes us from His existence to His worship. One of the strategies that God employs is He makes us reflect over creation. He says, for example, in the Quran, indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of the night and day, in it are signs for those of understanding. Those people who think and ponder. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, we will show them our signs in the creation and within themselves until it becomes clear to them, manifest that it's the truth. Allah, God is making us reflect. He's telling us to reflect. Also in the Quran, Allah says, do you not see the camels and how they were created? Observation. Do you see there's this notion out there, science or God these days, right? Either do one or the other. But Islam promotes science. The Quran promotes this. The Quran tells us to observe reality, look into the world because it leads us to the Creator. His signs are in creation. So we can argue, we can show that Allah, God gave us a rational mind. And He continuously prompts us to reason. Do you not reason? Do you not think? Do you not ponder? Do you not reflect? He gave us these minds and He gave us an intelligible universe. So when we look over it and we reflect over it, it would lead us to His worship. It will lead us to His worship. It's not by chance or at random. It doesn't make sense. So hopefully this is giving you guys something to think about, some things to reflect over. And I just want to conclude by this, and I want to try wrapping things up for you, if I can. If you want to continue to maintain, right, and this is your prerogative, you can do what you like. You want to continue to maintain that about, 14 billion years ago, the entire universe came into existence via nothing or by nothing, right, according to some. And then star systems formed, planets formed, solar systems formed, and eventually as science tells, about 3-point-something billion or 4 billion years ago, the Earth emerges. And the Earth falls into this precise place known as the Goldilocks zone in science. And it develops the right conditions and the right atmosphere and the right everything on the planet for life to emerge. Then life suddenly pops into existence. Again, something that's never been explained, how the first cell came into existence. Life emerges. And then we have these creatures which emerge, the human beings. And they're unique because not only can they do all the things other creatures do, but they have the ability to reflect and think about this whole process and understand it. If you want to claim all of this is by chance or at random, then go ahead. It's your prerogative, you can do that. But I really think as human beings, we know more than this. And we know there's something else going on. And if we employ the same basic reasoning that we use in our day-to-day lives, from when we wake up in the morning and go to work and do whatever else we do, the same reasoning which serves us well throughout our day-to-day lives, we will come to the conclusion that there must be a designer. There must be a greater intelligence behind everything. There's no denying it. There's no doubt about it. So hopefully this has been beneficial for you guys. I thank you all for listening and being patient. I'll conclude here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. We can open up for, Q&A now, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, brothers and sisters.
Brother, there are many people who come to the deistic belief in God,
yes,
but they don't come to a theistic belief because they have moral reasons for it. And they'll say things like, well, your religion promotes this kind of had punishment for these kind of people who can't help it, for example, homosexuals and stuff, things like that. And they say that, well, okay, we'll believe in a deist God, we'll get to that, but we don't believe that we'll believe in a personal theist God. So what's the appropriate response?
Well, it's an emotional problem, firstly. We need to realize this. What you've just said is an emotional issue. I don't like the concept of something, or I don't understand it, or according to my disposition, it doesn't make sense. Therefore, I'm going to reject it. That's not good term to reject something on, the truth on. That's an emotional reason, right? And we need to realize this. Many of the times, it's an emotional thing. And sometimes it's just due to the lack of understanding of a particular tradition or the way things are in a particular tradition, right? Secondly, I would say that from that perspective, if you argue or they want to maintain a deistic God, it doesn't make sense for several reasons, right? For example, what we just spoke about now, about an intelligible universe and us being rational, right? Think about this. If a creator gave us these faculties and gave us a rational universe, realizing how insignificant we are, right? How insignificant we are compared to the rest of the universe. We're not even a dot. I think it was Carl Sagan's book, he took the picture of the planet Earth from outside the solar system. We could hardly see it. Taking into consideration how insignificant we are, this creator has given us rationality. And he's given us this huge universe to observe over. This is one of the greatest signs of mercy, right? Greatest acts of mercy, if you like, right? And mercy is not the attribute of a deistic cause. It's the attribute of a personal being, right? There's many ways we can argue this, right? And it just makes sense. Our consciousness, right? We're aware, we're personal beings. So there's many ways we can argue this, but the main point is that it's an emotional issue. And I wouldn't even go this far. I will tackle it at the root. You have an emotional issue here. It's not about you have good reasons to believe in deism instead of theism, but you are rejecting theism solely based on your emotional predisposition. So that's how I would particularly address it. Hopefully that answers.
So being a mathematician, we obviously believe in proofs and certain things. So maybe you could tell us the empirical proofs of the existence of God.
Okay, firstly, that mindset is wrong. Okay, because when we look into science, you study the philosophy of science, what you realize is science has a scope. I know it's presented these days as something more than it is, right? And it's just injustice to science, right? Because it's almost like if it was a human being, it would be abuse here, literally, because science is a method. It's a beautiful method. It deals with the physical reality, right? I think it's Bertrand Russell who said science is an attempt to discover by means of observation and reasoning based upon it particular facts about the world, right? So what you scientists do is that they use observations, the senses, observe the reality, and then infer from that using their reasoning, right? Using induction. So understanding this, when it comes to God, God is a metaphysical reality beyond the physical, right? As we know in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, "Laysa kamithlihi shay." God is unlike anything we can imagine, right? So when it comes to science or empirical evidence for God's existence, directly, science can never prove or disprove the existence of God. It doesn't have a foot in the door. No way, right? It doesn't have a foot in the door. What we can say, what we can do is ask the question. The data science is showing us, so the observations we're seeing via the method, what do they point towards? That's what we can do, right? Do they point towards God, atheism, or theism? That's the best science can do. And as we reflected at the end about, laws of physics, laws of logic, and so on and so forth, it makes more sense to believe that there's a legislator behind all of this rather than chance or random events. Do you see? So science can't directly prove or disprove the existence of God, but we can look at the data and say, okay, what does it point towards? That's what we can do, essentially.
You recommend any books on philosophy of science?
There's, I think Mel Thompson, a basic one by Mel Thompson is a very good one to read, which is good. There's a few others by Peter Lipton's done one very good one on inferences to the best explanation, right? About how science concludes things, problem of induction, and all of these things, right? So these are good books to read. But anyone, before you study philosophy, this is a disclaimer I put out, yeah? Because we need to have our sound foundations in our own Aqidah first and foremost, right? Because sometimes what tends to happen is, and I've almost fallen into this trap in the past before, we get carried away with, we have this whole new world of philosophy, right? And we think so we're self-studying and everything, but we tend to move. The thing with philosophy is, it's sticky business, right? The point is and this shows the limited nature of human rationality and human minds, right? Philosophy, or the idea behind it, is that us human beings can attain truth via reasoning, right? Via deduction, induction, whichever form it may be. But the reality is, we can't really do that. Because if that was the case, we've had philosophers for thousands of years, right? There's been more disagreements in philosophy than maybe any other discipline, right? So this shows the limited nature of a human being, the human mind, right? So what I would say is that have a strong foundation in your own Aqidah first, and then study these things for the da'wah, inshallah, right? But know the limitations and their scope, right? We have ultimate absolute truth from Allah compared to, which is something speculation and man-made, not man-made knowledge, but knowledge attained via man's capabilities and limits, basically. So hopefully that answers the question.
If God made humans to worship Him, what is the point in angels, and why are we different? And why did He give us rational mind?
Okay. Firstly, they're not mutually exclusive. Just because we've been created to worship Allah doesn't mean He can't create other creation, right? So Allah can create what He wills. He's the creator. That's one of His attributes, right? Al-Khaliq. He creates. Okay, he's created creation we know of and creation we don't know of, but we're not being made aware of. And that has no significance on us being created to worship God, right? As Allah says in the Quran, He created us to worship Him, right? And so there's no conflict. I don't really see the point that's being made there, unless I'm missing something. There is no conflict as far as having other creation which worships God and having us another creation which worships God. If anything, it just shows the majesty of the Creator. The second part of the question, what was it?
Why are we different, and why did He give us rational mind?
Okay, why are we different? Well, God created us this way, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, and He put us on this earth to test us. Test which of us is best in deeds. We are the only creation which have free will. We have the choice. We have choices to make, right? Now, He gave us rational minds I believe one of the reasons is, and this is tadabbur, one of the reasons is so we can reflect over reality and which should lead us to God, which will lead us to His worship. Because as human beings, when we see something magnificent, something amazing, right, we're in awe, right? You know when you see a Lamborghini drive down the road, everyone stops and looks at it for a few seconds, right? Even the pious ones, yeah? There's a little glance over, right? And then we correct ourselves. But the point is we do these things, right? When we see something beautiful, something amazing, we reflect, we ponder, right? We're in awe. We're in awe of it. And this is how we've been wired, right? So if anything, it's a mercy from the Creator that He gave us rational minds. So when we look into the universe, when we do science, when we see, so you know what, the way I like to see is what science does is imagine you have a clock, right? And what science does, it peels away the face. You know where the digits are. It peels away the face, revealing all the gears and things like that inside. Yeah, this is a simple way of looking at it. And when we look at the gears and the way it's made, it should fascinate us even more. It should make us think, you know what? The one who made all of this, including myself, must deserve worship. Right? There's no other way around. It must deserve worship and sanctification. If I am willing to worship and sanctify things which are much more lower, houses, cars, money, a Lamborghini down the road, wherever it may be, then surely the one who made everything deserves more worship than anything else. Deserves the only one to deserve worship. Right? And that's the most rational thing to do at that point. So hopefully that addresses the question.
You see how some people, they say, oh, the Big Bang was the first cause. And then if we argue them, God caused that. How do you answer when they ask, oh, who created God?
Okay.
There always has to be a first cause.
Okay, that's a good question. The point is, see, this is something I think Richard Dawkins makes mention of as well. Okay, you want to believe in a God, well, who designed the designer, right? There's a problem, there's two ways we can answer this. Firstly, they're assuming that God is created, right? They're assuming God is created. We don't believe in a created God, right? We believe in a creator who's eternal, who's always been there, and He created the universe. Secondly, the second more technical way we can address this, you run into a problem when you say, well, who caused God, right? And Hamza elaborates on this quite well. He says, well, if you ask that question, then you can ask another question, who created that creator? And then you can ask another question, well, who created that creator, which created that creator, which created the universe? And if you do this forever, ad infinitum, you have an infinite regress, right? And if you have an infinite regress, we will never have the universe coming into existence today. The very fact that we're here today shows that there must have been a first cause, right? It necessitates a first cause. And an analogy we can give just to drive the point home, imagine if I want to go home on the bus today, yeah, and I need £1. And I ask Brother Sultan, can I have £1? He says, I'll give you £1 if the brother behind me gives me £1, right? And the brother behind him says, I'll give you £1 if the brother next to me gives me £1. And he says the same, I'll give you £1 if this brother gives me £1. And this went on all the way around the room, outside the wall, across the earth, ad infinitum, forever, right? This asking for £1. Would I ever get on the bus? Would that event ever take place? No. So the event of the universe coming into existence, if there was no first cause, would be an impossibility. It wouldn't happen, it wouldn't take place. Right? But I go with the first one, the easiest one. Why complicate things? We don't believe in a created God. Also, Dawkins has the notion of a creator as having parts, right? He thinks, well, God is much more complex than the universe that He created. Therefore, He requires an explanation. There's two problems there. Firstly, just because something is more complex doesn't mean it requires an explanation. Think about this. Dawkins wrote his book, The God Delusion, right? Now, who made Dawkins, for example? Think about this, right? He's more complex than his book. But he wrote his book. So it's possible, there's no problem there. The second thing is, when you think about explanations, right? If you look at the philosophy of science, one thing is when you posit an explanation, you don't require an explanation for the explanation. Right? This is something very important we need to realize. Because when you start asking for explanations of the explanation, and an explanation for that and that and that, again, you run into the problem of infinite regress, and you never have knowledge. Right? You never have an answer. So this is something very important we need to realize. An explanation doesn't require an explanation. If it's the best inference we have, it doesn't necessarily require an explanation. Right? So first, accept God exists, and then you can ask the question, okay, who created God? And then we can answer it adequately. But before, you can't just jump the gun and say, who created God? I'm not going to believe in God, but who created it? It's a problem there. Right? So hopefully that answers the question.
Scientists, especially evolutionists, say they have discovered pre-human forms such as Neanderthals, which is evidence that humans have evolved. What is your view on this? Okay, good.
We've done an hour-and-a-half long show on this, which is going to be up very, very soon, maybe next week or the week after. We've got a guy named Fawaz. He's studied biomedical sciences. He's doing his master's in something else now. And he studied this topic in depth I can't do justice to it, I'm not going to go into it. But from an evidential perspective, right, we can look at it from two different angles, okay? From an epistemic perspective, and we can look at it from an evidential perspective, right? I'm guessing the question's from an evidential perspective, right? Evidence-based question. Okay, nevertheless, I'll address both ways, yeah? Firstly, as far as evidence is concerned, what he shows in the show is some amazing things. He shows basically the fossil records that we have, or the transitional records that they claim to have. There's only fragments of those, right? There's a Millennium Man and there's a few others. Lucia, I don't remember which the other one was. But in some aspects, they've got fragments of the hip bone, just dust, right? And there's other bits and pieces or parts of the body that they have. I think the most complete fossil they have is probably, I think, 40% or something like that. Again, he goes over in the show. But the point he makes is, going by the evidence that's there, this is an extrapolation or an inference that's been made, which can be made, but the point is there's many other inferences that could be made from the same set of data. Right? This is called a problem of underdetermination in the philosophy of science. It's a very, very interesting problem. The problem is you can have a set of data, right? And based on the same data, it allows for many different conclusions. Now, how a conclusion is reached, the principles used to reach an explanation from a set of data, this middle space. You have explanation on this side, you have evidence, data on this side, this middle gap, that jump that's made, there's certain hidden principles which no one really knows of, right? And there's many factors that go into it, predisposition of the scientist, prior knowledge that a scientist may have, so on and so forth, right? So there's a lot. Evidentially, and I'm going to put this on record because this has been done in the video, so it's going to come out officially. Evidentially, you can infer many things from the data that they have as far as human evolution is concerned, right? As Muslims, we don't have a problem with other life forms evolving because the Quran doesn't say anything on it, right? So it's possible, as science tells us, other life forms evolved, right? But the problem here, I think, arises when we start to think that science is the way to truth, right? Or is the only way to, or the absolute way to truth that can give us facts. Because I know Dawkins has come forth and made the statement many times that we have evolution is a fact, right? If you don't believe in it, you're whatever, yeah? But the reality is science doesn't deal with absolute facts. It deals with degrees of certainty, okay, due to its nature, due to induction and so on. It can give you 99.9% truth, but it can never give you 100% truth, right? So from the epistemic point, the second point I was going to make, then if science can't give you 100% truth and we have something that's absolute from Allah, which we can deductively prove and show it's a miracle due to its linguistic and literary features, then what do you take? Do you take what God says or the method that human beings use to come to conclusions? Because remember, science has made many U-turns in the past as well. At points in history, scientists believed something was so. It was this way, absolutely this way. This was a fact. Later on, there's an entire complete U-turn made. And then they change their minds. This is the nature of science. It's evolving, it's changing. Science evolves, right? No pun intended, but it evolves, it changes over time. Right? And this is the reality and nature of science. So it's not a problem. I personally look at it in a very simple way. If science is saying X, and the Quran says Y, and they're conflicting with each other, then we do an epistemic weigh-in. We know the Quran is from God. Science is a method human beings use. So we take what the Quran says over science. Because you know why? There's a point in time, I think, where scientists believed that the sun was stationary, right? A couple hundred years ago. The sun was stationary. This was a view that was held. And this was a fact in science at the time, a scientific fact, right? Again, quotation marks, a scientific fact. And the point is that the Quran always said that these two bodies have their own orbit motion, right? They have their own motion or their orbits that they flow in as well, right? So the Quran was saying something against the science at the time. And there was a conflict at the time. But now, as science has progressed, what do they believe? Well, they believe that the sun has its own orbit around the galaxy and so on and so forth, right? So there's no problem. If we really think about this in the right way and understand what science is and understand what the Quran is, there's no issue there. So hopefully that addresses that point.
A question I've been asked, which I didn't quite know how to address, was that if God really created us to recognize Him and worship Him, and He wanted us to recognize Him, then why didn't He make this ability for us to recognize Him very easy for everyone?
Good question.
And people who who keep studying and keep trying to find truth,
yes,
find so many obstacles and difficulties.
Yes, good point. Because his life's a test, as the Quran tells us, right? It's a part of the test. Right? One of the first aspects of the test is living in this reality we live in, given what we're given as far as information, right, or knowledge or the fitrah, is to realize and discover Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a test in itself, right? Turning to God. And we've got to remember, if Allah had made it as easy as, if He wanted, He could have told every single one He exists, right? in one way or the other where we will be so convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt. But that takes away the aspect of a test. Why the need for this life then? You see, there's no need. We would all be in heaven, right? In Jannah. We'll be over, no test. But the very fact it's a test, and an aspect of the test is coming to this realization, using the tools that God's given us, is something beautiful, something profound. And I would even say that we've been given just enough. It's amazing when you think about it, right? We've been given just enough, and especially when we're in tune with our fitrah, there's no doubt, because the reality is when I first started practicing, I came to Islam due to rational argumentation and reasoning, firstly, right? And there was points where I would actually question those arguments myself. Because the nature of argumentation is that every argument, if you want, can be broken down to some extent, right? And this is the problem. But the certainty the heart gets from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? When you start praying, when you start practicing, when you sincerely turn to Him, that certainty, there's nothing comparable. No evidence can compare to that type of certainty. And this is why all we need to do as human beings, two things: be sincere and sincerely search and seek, and Allah will guide. That's it, khalas. Because we know Allah is the just. There's no way that Allah won't guide someone if they're sincerely looking for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what we need to realize, right?
Some Muslims believe in evolution, however, they believe that God is the driving force behind the evolutionary principle. Is it a correct belief?
Okay, from our perspective, as I understand it, from the Orthodox perspective, with evolution in general, we don't have a problem, okay? Understanding that the limited nature of science, we can take what science gives us, because it's a good method, right? As far as the rest of evolution is concerned, no problem. Animals, other life forms. But when it comes to human beings, there is a distinction, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran clearly tells us that He created Adam alayhi salam with His own hands, right? So we don't take the view that human beings evolve like other animals. But the reality is, bro, if Allah exists, He can do anything, right? So if He wills, He could have made other animals evolve in whichever way He chose to. And when it came to human beings, He could have just created human beings separately. There's no problem, right? Internally, there's no contradiction, because once you know the nature of God and He creates and He could do this, no problem, right? The problem is and this is the thing. It's a whole other lecture, right? We'll probably do this at some other time, right? Regarding science, scientists make inferences based on the data, right? And then many factors go into these inferences. And the thing is, because they've observed other life forms, and they may have more fossil records for other life forms evolving from other life forms, right? And what they do is then when they induce that, okay, therefore humans evolved in the same way, right, as other life forms. And from a naturalistic, scientific perspective, they're justified in doing this, right? They are justified in doing this. But we have knowledge which comes from the Quran, which tells us this is not the case, and we can accept that. And there's no real problem, like again, emphasizing the point, when we understand the nature of science, and they can't give us absolute fact, there's no issue there. So hopefully that addresses that point.
Going back to your comments about the difference between living life as a saint or a sinner, are you implying that the reason why people do good deeds is only for a reward from God? If so, what would you say to people who question the sincerity of those good deeds? Atheists often argue that people who do good deeds for the sake of God are insincere. They claim that committing a good act should be a free choice of the individual that is not influenced by the possibility of a bigger reward.
Okay, good. The question I'm asking is, why would you do, or what incentives do you have, or why would you do good, what reasons do you do good in the absence of God? What incentive do you have? What difference does it make, whether you do good or bad? That's the question we're asking, right? I'm not saying atheists don't do good things. Trust me, there are many atheists that do some amazing things, right? Many atheists are amazing human beings, okay? I know a few myself personally. They're amazing people. But the reality is that if there is no God and we are just accidents, right? And I'm using this crude word, but that's the reality, right? We are accidental byproducts of these processes. Then it makes no sense to do good or bad, right? There's no real distinction between why we should do one or the other. Because when the ends are the same, there's no real meaning behind these things. Right? But that's not to say, the reason I believe atheists and human beings in general, Christian, Muslim, we do good, or we incline towards doing good, is because of our fitrah. It's because of the nature God's created us on. It's to incline or try to want to do good. It's to feel good. When we do something for someone, we feel good, right? When you help an old lady cross the road, you feel good, right? Sometimes it's just because it makes you feel good. But this disposition of when you do good making you feel good, or when you do bad makes you feel bad. This is something God's placed within us, because there's no reason to believe that this disposition has emerged due to these processes, right? Feelings have emerged due to these processes. Remember, on naturalism, it's all physical, right? And now we're talking about these non-physical feelings, realities, and things like this. It doesn't make sense from that perspective. So hopefully that addresses that particular point as well.
You know, some atheists, they point out here that, can God create a rock that he can't lift and lift it?
Yeah.
How would you go about
Okay, good question. Hamza's done a small paragraph on this, and that's all this question deserves, because it's ridiculous. The question's false, because you're presuming in the question that God can do something, God can't do something, basically, right? So the question's nonsensical. It doesn't make sense, right? The way he answers it, if I can remember, he says, God can create a rock that he can't move, and then he can move it. So a ridiculous question deserves a ridiculous answer, basically.
Earlier when you were talking about truth and survival, why is it there's a distinction between the two? Because when he said that in the pursuit of knowledge, we are essentially finding new ways to survive and improving our survivability.
Okay, good question. That's good you brought it up, because I didn't go into the analogy. I'm going to give you a simple analogy, right? Okay, imagine I have two friends, okay? And this is a very simple, crude analogy. Imagine I have two friends, Sultan and yourself, right? Now, I invite you to a new flat that I've moved into, okay? It's on the 100th story. It's in London. I invite you there. Your rational faculty is fantastic. They're working, yeah? You're completely sane upstairs. Brother Sultan, for the sake of the example, he's a bit loopy, yeah? He's not functioning upstairs. Now, you come and I invite both of you to jump out the window of my 100-story flat. Jump out, go ahead, have fun. Yeah? You're being rational, you conclude that if I jump out, I'm going to land, I'm going to die. Right? I'm going to just splat all over the ground. It's not good. I'm not going to do it. So you decide, using your rational faculties, not to jump. Here is an example of someone whose rational faculties are working, which has led to his survival. Okay? On the other hand, Sultan, his rational faculties aren't working. He believes he was kissed by a bird a couple of months ago, and now he can fly. Yeah? This is what he believes. Right? So, when I offer him to jump out my window, he's like, let's go, let's do it. Yeah? He gets ready, but then he realizes that yesterday, he damaged his wings on the way out of his house. So he doesn't jump. Right? So here's an example of someone who has formulated false beliefs and still survives. Right? Now here's what we need to realize, the distinction. It doesn't damn the example. The point is that true beliefs as well as false beliefs can both result in survival. We're not talking about the level of which is more effective. As long as they can, then there's no need for the faculties which lead us to truth to develop. That's what we need to realize, right? So hopefully that addresses that particular point.